So, friends, welcome. It's good to have you here. My name is Stephen Fetter. I manage the United and Learning Program for the General Counsel Office. I say that every time we gather, so you will probably get sick of me saying that after a little while. But it is always a pleasure, really is, to be able to connect folks this way, and it just reminds me that we are a national church and how much we have in common for all that we have different regions of the country all over the world, all over the country. So thank you. Thanks for joining us and thanks for being a part of things tonight. We have a bit of a different program tonight because our fearful leader is away on a sabbatical in New Zealand. And so we wish him well. We are envious of his chance to travel that way. And in his absence, we have assembled a crack team of people who are going to share out a whole variety of different kinds of topics tonight. So let me just, you will recognize that slide template. We're using slides that Eric prepared before he left because he's just that sort of person. So let me remind you, first of all, as Eric always does, that we gather not just as people who care about money, but also people who care about God, people who are unified by our connection to the divine and by the ways that we understand ourselves not to be alone. This is why we're here. This is why we do what we do. This is whose we are. The church, to celebrate God's presence, to live with respect in creation, to love and serve others, to seek justice and resist evil, to proclaim Jesus crucified and risen, our judge and our hope. That's why we're here. It's the ministry that each of you, as treasurers and trustees and administrators in one way or another, support and encourage and nurture. And that's important. So thank you for that. Also want to take a moment to remember that most of us did not come from this continent. Most of us have ancestors that came from somewhere else, but that some of us did. So take a moment to remember where you're sitting. Think about the ground that your house is built on, that your church is built on. Think about the ways that it has nurtured people and been nurtured by people for thousands of years before my ancestors came to this country. And that's probably true for many of us. Think about the ways that land grounds us and nurtures us and keeps us alive. And take a moment to acknowledge those who were on the land before your ancestors were. The Anishinaabe lands on which I live and work here in the town of Aurora, north of Toronto, are the traditional and treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island, as well as many other nations whose presence continues this day. Aurora is part of the treaty lands of the Mississaugas and the Chippewas, recognized through Treaty 13 as well as the Williams Treaties of 1923. I'm sure you could say something similar about where you're from too. So here's our agenda for tonight. We've got some follow-up on the CRA news that Eric was sharing with us last week. So Clyde is going to talk to us about the new T3010 form. Eric talked to us last month about that, not last week, last month. But Clyde is just going to walk through those slides again because there's a couple of significant changes in the new T3010, and it's going to hit most of our churches. And the disbursement quota calculation. So thank you, Clyde, for being prepared to talk about that. Rose is going to talk about the underused housing tax. This is an issue, and we're not happy about it, and it's going to cause some problems for folks in our congregations who aren't going to want to do it. And we just need to warn you that it's an important thing to pay attention to. So uh, Rose is going to walk through some slides for us, and we can point you to an FAQ page at the General Council website that I hope will help you. It's an issue only for the congregations that have manses, but that's about 400 congregations across the country. So I imagine there are a number of you here online tonight for whom that's going to be an issue. The primary piece of our agenda tonight is a kind of basic introduction to ADP payroll. Most of you are already running a payroll, and for most of you, this will be review rather than brand new stuff. But it sure helps sometimes to do the review as well. So we're delighted to have Angelica here on board. Angelica and I are working together on building an onboarding course for ADP payroll administrators in congregations. And this is our first kick at the can. So we'll walk through the kinds of questions that she always gets, and sort of a bird's eye view of why we're doing it this way, and what you need to know as congregational leaders managing payroll in your own setting. And then some brief discussion at the end of our evening on the assessment for the statistics forms that we all have to fill out, and that's coming up within the next week or two, and then the assessment that'll be based on the financial reporting we do. So that's the shape of our evening. We'll, as usual, stop throughout to take questions. I am watching the chat as we go along, but I'm also a little more involved in content tonight. So apologies ahead of time if I miss your comment on the chat. Just put it in again. And I'm doing my best to do double duty here as well. But Clyde, you're going to start by presenting this one. So let me turn things over to you. And you're muted, so we need to bring you up.
There we go.
Thank you.
It helps to unmute. Well, most of what I'm going to talk about has already been mentioned in past webinars, but I got to highlight it. I've been getting questions for the full month about this, and so it's worth going over some of it. The Charities Directorate, if you're still using paper to send things to them and you want a fax number, it is no longer the 613 number. These are the two that you can use now. I would suggest strongly, as we've been doing for many months, that you get a CRA My Business account, because you don't have to send a fax. You send it directly to them. It gets right into their system. And in fact, if you make a call 5 minutes after you send it, somebody can see it on their computer. So it's much better off, much quicker service to do it that way. But there's your numbers. If you want to come back to them, they're on the slide deck for tonight. So we'll move ahead on to the next one, which is now heading into the T3010 form. It's very important, especially if you're using paper, to make sure you get the right version of the T3010. It's unusual that they made the change effective December 31, 23. And that was to catch all those that have a year end in December. The way I understand it is something like about 80% of all charities are a year end of December. And so they're making sure they get the new T3010 in use. When you look at the form down in the lower left-hand corner, it has 24 in brackets. And so that's the one that we need to be sure we're doing. If you use the CRA My Business account to populate a T3010, when you put in your year-end date, it will automatically pull up the right one for you. You don't have to worry about it. If you use the wrong one, consider yourself not filed. And you can very quickly be rejected and lose your charity status. So you don't want to do that. Make sure you're using the correct form. Moving ahead to the next one, Just a few points here. We'll talk about some of them a little more in depth. We no longer need to report 10-year gifts. In past, we had to, if we had any that had at least 10 years that we had to keep the principal on, we had to report those separately, but we don't do that anymore. There's requirements now for the disbursement quota, which we used to do years ago, and it's back again, but it's really not hard to do. It takes a little bit to get used to it the first time through, and you'll have your numbers coming along every year after that. The new reporting requirement for donor advised funds generally is not something that churches have to deal with unless you have a fund that might be controlled by a specific group of people to give out grants, scholarships and things like that. And if you're doing that kind of thing, you also have the T1441. It's a third form that makes up a part of the T3010 filing. And we now have to complete that for all non-qualified donees. And again, it's not very many of us that send money off to non-qualified donees. So it's very limited applicability, but we have to make sure that we're aware of it. Moving ahead there for most churches, as I said, only as scholarships and bursaries come into play. Donor advised funds, most of us would probably remember what they are. It's a fund where there's probably many donors to the fund, and they have a certain amount of say in how that money is spent. But the last comment on this slide is the important one. Even if they have a say in it, it's the charity's sole responsibility to make the decision. So if you don't agree with what they're doing, you can make the decision as long as you're meeting the needs of that fund and the documentation that goes with it.
So that would be kind of like a scholarship fund where you're giving money to a student once a year, and the family member of the person in whose memory the scholarship was created is on the planning committee or the grant committee or something.
It could be that, yes.
Okay, that makes sense. So that wouldn't hit most of us then.
No, it won't hit most. There are some, I'm aware of at least one, but it's not very often that comes up. And again, donor advised funds, the new T3010 form, you have to provide the details of it. I'm not going to take the time to go through all of these. We did that last month. But the thing to remember is that if you've got one of these funds, follow down through the list in your T3010 form and it'll fill in itself. But you do have to specify them. Moving on, I'm running through this fairly quick because it is a review. Disbursement quota. Years ago, we had to calculate it all out. It told us how much we had to spend the next year on our charity activity. And then they did away with it. And now they've brought it back. I can see from looking at the form that it wouldn't be much for them to put it back into the system and start doing it again on their own. But that's probably a number of years out. I haven't heard anything from CRA about them working on that even yet. But this is a new part to complete, is the Schedule 8. And you're talking in a lot of the numbers you're looking at, the hardest numbers to find is what the value of your non-use charitable activities, what that was 24 months ago at the beginning of the year and 24 months ago at the end of the year for 2023. So you're looking back at the beginning of 2021 and the end of 2021. But once you've got that in, and as you go down further, and next year you've already got your 20 beginning and end, and soon you'll have the numbers just keeping track of it from year to year. But remember that this is only for your your funds that you have, um, both assets and everything else that you did not use for charitable activities. If we go on to the next slide, it lists a couple of the things there, I believe. No, we're still a slide away from it, but that's okay. You crunch the numbers up to find out what's involved in this. And if you're over $1 million, the reporting to figure out the tax on it, as they refer to it, is moved up from 3.5% to 5% that has to be spent. So it's a way of trying to get more of the funds that are held back and are sitting in a pot somewhere to be spent, used for the purposes for which they were given. We will show you some examples of the schedule here in the next slide or two. Determine your disbursement quota obligation for the current fiscal period. And every time I see this, it's then estimate Dairy Queen. It's the DQ obligation for the next fiscal period. Using the form's calculations, it's the average value of property that the charity did not use on charitable activities. It includes the amount of any accumulated property. If you've got permission to accumulate, you can still do that. They are not giving any more permissions out to accumulate in the future. It's all there out there at this point. The total expenditures on your charitable activities, the total amount of grants made to non-qualified donees, which, as I said already, not too many of us will do, but it could be things like scholarships and bursaries. And the total amount of gifts made to qualified donees comes into play in this as well. So if we go on to the next slide.
What kind of thing, Clyde, would be property that the charity did not use on charitable activities? Is that monies in a trust fund that is just growing, or what does that mean?
Okay, there are two things. We can take it to real property, real estate. And I think this comes up on the next slide or two.
Okay.
Where if you've got a part of your building that is dedicated totally, for instance, to a Montessori type school, that is not charitable activity. And so it is suggested that we have to determine the value of that. And that's not charitable activity. So that becomes part of this calculation.
So somebody in the chat has said they've rented 80% of one of their buildings to a municipal community center, not 100%, but 80%.
Then they take 80% of the value of the building and include it in here.
Okay. Thank you.
If it's in the form of an investment, if the investment is set up in a way that anything earnings on it are just rolled over and reinvested and none of it's paid out, then that's not used in charitable purposes. So you've got to decide what you're on your own, what is in there and what isn't, but be on the conservative side with it. So even after you've crunched the number
about money from the sale of a manse.
Money from the sale of a manse, that depends on how it's invested.
Say some more.
In the sale of a manse in past, we used to have that in a manse fund, and we had to take portions of it out to support the minister housing. Okay. And some of them are still doing that, some are not. But if you do that, then obviously that's used for charitable purposes.
So the income would be used for charitable purposes. What about the principal?
The principal just sits there and earns that income.
Okay. So it's considered to be used for a charitable purpose because it's creating income you're going to use for the charity.
Yes,
Got it. And
that's the way I
similarly, I
look at
guess,
it.
for manses that are rented.
Now, a manse that's rented, if it's rented to the public, it's somebody at arm's length, then it's not charitable purposes.
Mhm. And
If it's
similarly, rented for a daycare is not a charitable purpose if it's a not for if it's a for-profit daycare.
even if it's a not-for-profit, they're not charities.
Okay.
Some of them might be, but they're not all.
Yeah.
If
So
it's a registered charity, I think you could get away with it. But
so some people are renting out rooms that then generate income that will cover the costs of the building so the charity can function.
if it's a single room or a couple of rooms and it's not 100% of the time, then I would suggest that that's for charitable purposes.
Mhm.
And I use the school example because in my own church, we have a wing of the church that is even locked off to the rest of us.
Mhm.
Now, if you know the combination, you can get in, but generally speaking, we don't use it in any way. So that to me says that that has to be counted as a non-charitable purpose wing. Okay,
Thank you.
if we move on to the next slide here, uh, once you've determined the amounts to include, it's a simple calculation, and we'll show you that on the slide here in a couple of minutes. The negative effect of this is going to be very few churches affected. Most of us spend more on charitable activities than this will ever generate, unless you've got a pile of investments that are not being used, you know, what I would call in a charitable way. As Eric put on the slide, you need millions of unused assets to be offside on this. So if we can go on to the next slide here, and this is where there's a few things that are spelled out: the real estate, investments, other assets that were not used directly in charitable activities or administration. And this may include, for an example, cash in a bank account. If it's just sitting there, you don't use it, count it as non-charitable. Inventory, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, all of it. It's a judgment call when it comes down to it. And as I said, you're better to err on the side of including it in a non-charitable use than to uh, claim everything is charitable and not put it in, because you're still going to not you're not going to have a problem meeting your disbursement quota.
So what is the disbursement quota? Remind us.
We will explain that when we get to the
Got it.
examples there a little further. On to
Next
the
slide.
next slide, if we could. This is where it was suggested about the building and making sure that if you've got a part of the building that's used 100% of the time for non-charitable activities, then that has to be prorated. And it means we have to have a rough idea what the building is worth. Okay, and on to the next one. And there we start coming into our calculations. This comes right off the white bars come right off the T3010. And these first two lines are actually on the T3010 at the end of Schedule 6. They're the very last part of it. It's two lines that have been added. They're looking for the value of the 24 months before the beginning of the fiscal period, which, as I said, was the beginning of 2021 when we're looking at 2023, and 24 months before the end of the fiscal period. And all you're doing is putting a number in here. There's no calculations to it other than to determine what the charitable act, what the property we held that was not used in charitable activities at that time. And then we go on to the next slide, and this is where the calculations start coming in. The amount you put in line 5,900, which is the beginning of the year, goes on line 805. No calculations, it's done. The accumulated property has been granted. Enter the total amount accumulated less all disbursements. If you've got accumulation privileges that you had to apply for to get them in prior years, as I said, this is not happening anymore. So the amount that you have there comes from line 5,500, but it goes on line 810 in this form. And then you subtract 805 or 810 from 805. If it's positive, it puts it on 815. If it's a negative number, you put in 0. Then the amount that is on line 815, if it's 0, you're finished. You don't have to go any further on here. But if it's a positive number, you take the first $1 million, multiply it by 3.5 up to $1 million, multiply it by 3.5%, and that's the number that goes in 820. A little more complicated for the other side for 825, 830, and 835, but it's still a relatively straightforward calculation, but this is where they're picking up the value over $1 million. And as I said, here it becomes a 5% value rather than a 3.5. Then you take line 820 or 835, whichever is larger, and add it to 840. This is your charity's disbursement quota requirement for the current fiscal year. And what that means is the amount on 840 is the amount that you have to spend in the current fiscal year in your reporting. You have to have spent it or should be spending that much on charitable activities. Then you go to the next line. It's line 5,000 on your return, and that's 845 here. It's the expenditures on the charitable activities. So you've listed a whole lot of expenses that are all just charitable activity. In total, you put the amount in this 845. If you've made any grants to non-qualified donees, that goes on line 850, and it comes straight off of line 5045. And then any gifts made to qualified donees, which we've been reporting for years, is on line 5050 on the return. That number gets put in here at line 855. You add up the lines 45 to 55 and put it in on 860. And then 860 minus 840. This is your charity's disbursement quota excess or shortfall for the current fiscal year. If you've got excess, you just let it set. If you have a shortfall and you want to go back and do the calculations for the last 5 years, you can, because you can bring that amount forward if you had excess. But I don't see it being worthwhile doing the 5 years back, because I expect probably close to 95 or 100% of us having an excess on 865. But it's just to make sure that we're spending sufficient on our charitable activities and not just trying to get rich. Okay, and we'll come back to questions in a couple minutes because I think there's only one more slide. This is just a little more where you, in step two, you estimate using the same sort of thing for your investments to know what your disbursement quota is for the next year. In other words, when you're doing this one, it's for the year of 2024. And it gives you an idea whether you're online with it or not. Okay, there's lots of comments. I don't know whether there's lots of questions.
There are, but I think you've hit most of them. So that draws us to a close to that part. So let me just lots of little questions about, does this piece of money count? Does that piece of money account? So, what about a bequest that can only be used for church repair? What school classrooms on a Montessori school you try? What about money in a bank account for a refugee while we're waiting for approval? What amount what value should we place on our building? Some of these kinds of questions, the little details, are these going to trip us up, you think?
I'm not sure that any of it's going to trip us up. The way I would look at it, if you're accumulating funds in a bank account, or you have funds in a bank account waiting on a refugee coming in, you can't spend that because it's designated funds.
Yeah. What
And
about
so,
what about the cost of the property, which of course just sits there on highly expensive land in some of our big cities, but can't be spent?
well, it's part of the value of the property.
Yeah.
That's just unfortunate that it comes in. But again, I still expect, even with the value of that land, um, if it were to be sold, it's the land they're buying, not the building, in most
Still be
cases.
Could still be millions of dollars.
And it could be, but I don't expect it to be enough to trip us up on our disbursement quota when we only need to spend, well, the first million's only $35,000, and most of us spend that much
Yep.
if we've got $1 million sitting there in the bank.
Sure. Thank you. What if you own a 200-acre farm? Mark says. Well, I guess everybody has to do their own calculation, but we'll trust you that you think this isn't going to be onerous for us. It sounds like it's more onerous to do the reporting than it is to worry about it at the other end.
Like, I think it is to make that decision. The thing to do though is when you're making the decisions for this year, make note of what you've included, because then it'll give you your break for next year. You'll know what you're doing.
Sure.
And consistency is probably the biggest factor of winning anything when you're dealing with the CRA.
Makes sense to me. I think that the individual questions that have come in have been covered by the sort of general advice you're giving us, Clyde. And if people need specific information on their specific situation, are you able to answer questions offline?
We'll give it a try.
Super. So reach out directly to Clyde if you have questions about your own specific situation, because I think we should move on in this program.
Okay.
Thank you for leading us through that. So we're going to switch hats here and bring up Rose instead. So Rose, let me find there you are. Add your spotlight in here. So there is this underutilized housing tax that has come to light that we have to be worried about. Where did this come from, and what's this about? What's this for?
Okay. Back in, it's a federal 1% tax on ownership on property that is underused. And so that it came into effect on January 1st, 2022. So subsequently, they want people to file for the 2022 year as well as 2023. And the deadline for those, as you can see on the slide, is April 30th of this year.
And the primary purpose of this was to deal with foreign people who were buying property and flipping houses and that kind of stuff, right? We're trying to avoid the foreign.
Correct. And unfortunately, the way the United Church is structured, we fall into this legal quagmire where manses really do fall under this issue. So that's part of it, because typically, and the way we wanted all of our properties to be done is in the name of the trustees of XYZ United Church. So that's why the manses fall into this, you know,
Because
as I called it,
it catches trusts as well as foreign buyers.
correct.
Okay.
And just on that, the first piece of advice I would give to our churches who have manses is to make sure who is on the deed for the manse. I've already had a couple of churches that have come and said the name on the deed is the United Church of Canada, or it's your own church. If it's in the name of the United Church of Canada or your own church name, you do not have to file this form. It's only if trustees are named for your manse properties.
The thing that blew me away reading this, Rose, was that churches have several trustees, right? You know, 3 to 15 trustees in your church, and every darned one of them has to file this. That seems
correct.
crazy.
I know. And Eric reported last month, and the general counsel made an appeal to the CRA. It was declined. So this is the best advice that we can offer to our churches is you need to file it, and each individual trustee should make that filing, and they have to do it for each of the 2022 and 2023 years. So yes.
So I think it's important to say again that this is only about manses, it's only about
correct
houses. So there are only about 400 of those across the church. It is not going to touch every treasurer and every trustee on the line tonight, but it's going to touch about 20% of our churches.
Correct. And I just saw a question that came up. Your trustees don't have to be named. If it just says trustees of XYZ United Church, then your trustees on record at December 31st of that year are the ones who have to file the forms.
And of course, you're listed every year in the annual charity filing, so they know who you are.
Yeah.
So
well,
I
not necessarily.
I inserted a slide here, Rose, and let me speak to it, and then we'll go back to you. The general counsel staff have put together, with Eric's help, a frequently asked questions page that will describe all of these issues. I've got the link there, and I will put the link at the ChurchX page too, but you can also go to the general counsel website and just put into the search box underused housing tax, and you can see here the heading for that page. It will basically tell you in words everything that Rose is going to say in the next 10 minutes. But, some of us do better by listening and some of us do better by reading. And we wanted you to hear the information in both directions. So that's where you can go. And as I say, that link up there, I can't put it into the chat without closing the PowerPoint, but we'll make sure that it's at the ChurchX page so that you can get it if you need to. Rose, that was my commercial, and then back over to you.
Okay. Okay. Again, I think if we said that, you do have to file the return and that type of thing. So yes, so each trustee should file this form and that type of thing as well. Yeah. So manses fall under that. So this is what the form looks like. It's called UHT 2900, and in the previous slide, the link on our United Church website, if there is a link to actually the CRA site that will pull up this form that you can then download and either fill in. It's a fillable form or print and fill it in on under that. So before Eric went away, he did do a sample. So this is what the part 1 of the form looks like. You can see up in the upper right corner the calendar year, and the legal name of the owner is Clyde Harris under protest. And yes, you do have to use your own individual social insurance number, and that is only done as a identifier with CAR to make sure that you are a legitimate purpose and that type of thing. So the mailing address will be the physical address of the manse property, and the rest is, fill in as you can.
Yeah. And so let me just interrupt and say Melissa is wanting to be clear. Their manse deed says the trustees of the United Church at Montague and Kings, no individual names. And the trustees, of course, change, but they're reported annually, and it's the trustees that were reported in those years who are on the hook for this.
Correct. Yes.
Every
So-
year when you file the T3010, you file another form, I can't remember what number it is, that indicates who your trustees are. And so the government knows, or it's supposed to know.
Well, your 1235 form, it's a director's as well.
That's right.
Because your president treasurer, they may not be your trustees.
They may not be, sure.
Correct. So, that type of thing as well. So it could be too. And yeah.
So is that phone number, is that the phone number of the person filing or of the church? This is your own personal information, right?
Well, the mailing address, he's put in, the address of the manse. So Clyde, can I just ask if you have any wisdom on that? Should it be church phone number or your own phone number?
Personally, I think everything in that section should be your personal information.
Okay. All right.
That's
Yeah.
the
So
way
it should be your.
Yeah, that's the way I would look at it, because they're trying to identify the person at this point.
Okay.
Later on, it becomes the manse.
Okay.
Correct. Okay.
Thank
So
you.
then, yeah. Thank you, Clyde. So yeah. So your first part is your own personal information, and
information about the owner. That makes
correct.
sense.
Correct. So
Good.
it would be your own personal mailing address and that type of things. So the next part is optional. So I would leave it off. I would leave it blank.
Probably wise not to include the under protest. That's just Eric being mad that he lost the appeal.
That's right. That's right. So just on that next part, part 2, we may not have that a slide, but part 2 of the form is information about the residential property. So that's where you would put the physical address of the manse on the form. So that type of thing. So, and one of the lines on in part 2 is asking for the assessed value. And usually you should refer to your latest municipal assessment property information. In Ontario, it's the municipal MPAC. For other provinces and territories, it could have different names, but often, even though churches don't pay property tax, they do receive an assessment document every year, the value of the manse.
I can imagine this is going to be onerous for some of our trustees who are
Correct.
elderly and stuff, but maybe one person in each congregation can fill out the form, do all the research, and then issue copies to everybody else and say, here's the pre-filled form for our particular site. Sign on the dotted line.
Yep. And that could be, the trustees could get together and do it collectively. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And your personal, like your individual information would be what would be, change in all of them and that type of thing too.
And the rest would all be identical. That makes sense.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Absolutely. This next part, just a sec, sorry. I just got my notes on where these comes from, what part. So under this is, do you own the residential property as a partner? The answer is no. And do you own residential property as a trustee? Yes, you do. And if 2020, is line 120 is yes, then you would only fill this in if you have an actual trust account. But Eric, in most cases, that may not be applicable. It's usually a bank account for the manse to pay the manse expenses. When my pastoral charge owned a manse, it was just a regular bank account, so it's not a trust account unless you're structured that way. It would be not applicable. Okay.
Thank you.
And then under part 6, is the ownership under, is it exempt under any of the following exemption? You would say yes. And box 620 is because you are a trustee of a trust that is a specified Canadian trust in respect to the calendar year. So part number 2. And the definition of that is because it's defined as a registered charity in the Income Tax Act. So that is what a specified Canadian trust, the definition is a trust under which each beneficiary having a beneficial interest in the residential property, an excluded owner, i.e. a registered charity as defined in the Income Tax Act. So as a charity, then you would be that's under the exemption under that form. And then the last form would be the last part of it. You would just sign and attest and date it and send it in.
Okay. So I've had one question so far about this, apart from the outrage that we have to do it all. That is about trustees. And what if the trustees on the deed are actually long dead?
Well, you would still, as part of, you have a requirement in the manual to have trustees. It doesn't matter with the original trustees from 1800 would be long dead. It's who your current trustees
are. Yep.
Correct.
What about
going into that point a little further, the current trustees for December 31, 22?
Yes.
And then if they change, the current trustees for 23.
Correct.
Because you want the trustees that are applicable to the reporting period.
Yep.
Correct.
So Dave says, can you speak about completing part 2 of the form?
I'm not sure.
Remind us what was on part 2 of the form. Was that simply information about the house?
It is. It's about the residential property. So it's the physical address, the type of building, and that. So what type of ownership? Sorry, and the percentage of the ownership. Clyde, I'm sorry, Clyde. I keep referring to you, but I know you've advised some of your pastoral charges about it. Do you have any sense on type of ownership and percentage of ownership?
The type of ownership is sole.
Okay.
Because you're doing it as a trustee body.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And so the percentage ownership is 100% there.
Yeah.
Okay. So each person is 100% then.
So you don't own it as an individual. You own it as one of the trustees, but every trustee has to file.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay. I was a little confused on that.
And Lynn is asking, so the manse is rented long-term with a rental agreement. Do we have to file this form? The answer is yes, because it's a house that's owned by a Canadian trust.
That's right.
That's why it has to be filed. Doesn't matter whether the minister's living in it or somebody else, or if it's empty. It's owned by either a trust or by a foreign owner, in this case by a trust. Barbara says, can the form be submitted from all the trustees together, or must it be separate?
Well, each trustee has to fill in the form, but I see no reason why they can't all be mailed together.
Yeah. So Barbara, the form requires the individual's name. So each individual trustee has to file a form, and the minister is also a trustee by the manual. Yes.
Correct, but the minister is only a trustee ex officio because of the nature of their business. And we had a discussion this afternoon, and it would be our recommendation that the minister does not have to complete this form.
Okay.
Because when they are no longer a minister at that pastoral charge, they would not be a trustee of the church.
In what year did you become an owner? Well, I guess the original year of the deed, or the year that you personally became a trustee?
It's when you became a trustee. That's the important part of it.
So Hazel is asking again, we have 5 trustees. Does each trustee show a 20% ownership? And I think you said no. Each trustee shows a
No, it's
100%.
100% ownership, correct. And it was our, when all of this was being discussed, it was that it was only necessary for our trustees to complete sections 1, sorry. I keep losing my sheet of paper, and I should know this. You would only complete forms 1, 2, 6, and 9. So that was the recommendation. So you would not have to complete 6.
So Melissa says underline 270, name of owner, you put your name only, and underline 275, 100%.
Correct. Yes.
And Rob
Rose,
said
this is
nobody's going to want to do
Richard,
this.
could I ask this question, Rose?
Mhm.
The sections that we have to complete, I didn't follow which ones you said we must complete.
1, 2, 6, and 9. So part 1 is about the owner. Part 2
Yeah.
is about the
But then
property.
you said we don't do section 6, so I was confused.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I misspoke. They asked a question about 5. So part 1 is about yourself. Part 2 is about the property. Part 6 is about the exemption. And then part 9 is your signature and attestation, and that type of thing. So my apologies. I misspoke on she asked about 5 and I said 6. So yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Could I ask one more question to
Sure.
you folks it's Richie Gage in Merritt, BC?
Go ahead.
We have we have 4 trustees, very small church. Anyway, 2 of them have said they're not going to fill it out. So if I go back to them and say, you have to fill it out, I know what's going to happen to the 2 of our most active trustees. They'll quit. They'll walk away. So I wanted to fill this out on my own and send it, and they know, and show them what I'm filling out, and as chair of the trustees. Can I do that?
They are going to have to fill it out, and because they've got to sign it. Now you can fill out the form. They have to sign it. If they don't fill one out and it gets caught, there is a penalty for it.
But Clyde,
$5,000, I think I saw.
our problem is they're going to walk away. They don't want to sign it.
But they're still trustees as at the end of 22 and 23. If they resign today, they were still trustees. They must fill it out.
Or be subject to the fine.
Yep.
So they can walk away from it now, and they won't have to fill it out next year.
That doesn't help my problem. Thanks, though.
Oh, I know it doesn't. This is why Eric is so angry about this. Eric knows that there are going to be people across the country who are annoyed and look at this as being intrusive big government, and brings up all the conspiracy theories in ways that make us all uncomfortable. This is why he worked on the appeal, and this is why he's so upset that he lost the appeal. I think what I saw, Jane, is that the fine is $5,000 per year per person that doesn't sign, if they get caught.
Yeah, it's $10,000 for a corporation.
Okay.
Yes.
So the fine is against the individual trustee.
That's right.
Scary, eh? This is not what we signed up for.
That's the point. It is definitely not.
No, it's not. And I mean, Rivers, I keep saying it would be helpful for the center to reassure all trustees that, well, we're doing the best we can. We're unfortunately, this is the way the law works. And so you can get advice from Clyde and from Eric when he's back. But it is up to the trustees to sign. We can't do it for you. All we can do is tell you what you're obligated to do. Yes, it's trying to solve one problem and it's created another. Absolutely, Heather. Burton says, how will they know if all the trustees have filed? Are they going to go hunting? I don't know. Is it possible that they'll do an audit and catch you? Sure it is.
Yeah, since this is a relatively new program that the government's put out, there's likely to be spot audits, and so
they're certainly going to be pretty careful the first few years. Diane says
correct.
this form does not give the CRA any information on an individual basis that they don't already have, and that's true. CRA
Yes.
already knows your SIN number and your address. So they're not asking for, the only thing you're telling them, aside from your SIN number and your address, is that you're a trustee. And what is the implication to the trustees? Kelly says, are they not just confirming that they hold property in trust for the congregation? That's all they're confirming.
Yep.
Yep. They're not going to be asked to pay anything unless unless they don't do it. They're not going to be asked to pay anything. They're not on the hook personally for
So
anything.
do we have to fill out the form where they want to know what other property, other houses you own, and that's the part that they don't want.
Yeah. And
No.
the answer is no.
No,
As
it's
a
strictly
trustee, you don't have other properties.
you would just have your own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's an important question. I mean, they are not going to use this information to find out anything else about your financial situation. Frustrating, isn't it? Brenda wants to be clear again about the minister. The minister is, by virtue of her office, a member of the trustees. You're saying she doesn't have to file this form anyway?
That was we believe that that they don't need to. Yes.
That's interesting. I would not have guessed that. That's interesting.
It was a discussion we had late this afternoon. Actually, Eric weighed in from New Zealand, so that type of thing. So, but if the minister wishes to fill in the form, there's no reason why they can't. But that would be our recommendation.
So Fran says, does the United Church have a charitable number? Does each pastoral charge have their own? And the answer is yes. The United Church does have a charitable number for gifts that come to the general council office and often to the regional council offices too, but pastoral charges have their own.
Somebody's asking there about what if the deed from 1870s disappeared? You get a municipal assessment form every year, or most churches do across Canada, and that it's addressed to whoever considered the owners of the property, the trustees of which church.
Oh.
So that's the current one that you've got to use.
I was advised, this is Bob from Neepawa, Manitoba. I was advised by our land registry, the registrar, that all of our trustees that are named on the municipal assessment are dead. And it was going to cost us several $1,000s to update it. And then she said, the only time you really want to update it to save yourself money is when you actually sell the property. Then it's the current trustees that are making the decisions. And then you don't have to pay us every time you change your trustees on the deed. Don't do it until you sell the property. So we're way down the road before we're selling.
Yes.
I think it's nevertheless honest to say, though, that the trustees of the property are not the dead people. They're the people who've been elected by your congregational meeting,
That's right.
period. So it doesn't matter what the deed says. If it names, Jane Smith and John Doe and 3 people who are dead, you know how it would be resolved if you went to court. So it is the trustees who've been elected that have to do this.
Yes, there was a question. Yes, you can find the form online. The easiest way I found it was to go onto the United Church, the link that Stephen had earlier. And partway through that, it says the UHT form. Click on that and it'll take you to the CRA website. Or go on the CRA website and type in UHT 2900 and that type of thing. So yeah.
Let me find that link for you here, and I'll just pop it in the chat while we're talking. And then you can go and see what Eric wrote before he left. So Burton says the manse assessment is addressed to the United Church of Canada at our church address. Can we ignore this filing since it's not in the name of the trustees?
Correct. Yes. Yes. If it's named the United Church of Canada or your own specific church name with no mention of trustees, you do not have to file this form.
Isn't that bizarre? Eh?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's bizarre. It's bizarre because the church, individual church, or the United Church of Canada are a registered charity.
Yeah.
As soon as we put the trustees on there, it's no longer a registered charity.
No, it becomes, yeah.
Okay. I think
So that's why I said, like, check how it's named.
Okay.
The form is called UHT-2900 on the CRA site.
Okay, and I've just added those numbers into the chat.
Thank you.
Thank you, friends. I need to move us along because Angelica has been waiting really patiently. So again, Rose, one last time, the issue really is if the title is in the name of the trustees.
Correct.
If the title of the property includes the word trustees.
Trustees. Yes, then you do have to fill out this and continue. If there are questions, please continue to email them to me at the CRA help@united-church.ca. I will do my best with Clyde's help and some advice from afar every once in a while. Then we will endeavor to answer your questions as best we can.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm going to move us along because, as I say, Angelica has been waiting really patiently. And all of the email addresses will come up at the end of our program, so not to worry. And Angelica, let me bring you up and remind us about your role in the General Council and why are we inviting you into here?
So my role is a director of HR and payroll services. We have a team of payroll specialists and we also have a team of HR specialists. And today specifically, we're going to focus on some questions, I guess, Stephen, that you're going to ask me high level about payroll and the payroll system that we currently use for pastoral.
So let's start there. Back in the day, every pastoral charge managed their own payroll. We switched over to ADP instead. Why did we do that? What's that about?
Well, I wasn't here, but what I noticed that we moved into a payroll system specifically is the importance of paying employees in a timely manner and accurately. The system helps us process transactional payroll tasks, and some of them are, the system calculates CPP, EI, tax, and specifically the UCC pension and benefits premiums. The system also assists us in entering new information about the employees, new hires, any payroll related information, status changes. You are, as a payroll administrator, are able to do all of these things on the system. In addition to that, the system remits, the payroll provider ADP remits the statutory deductions to the government agencies and the pension and benefit contributions to the plan providers, which is key and important. The process eliminates errors and avoids any late remittances and penalties, so it is cost effective. Tax forms are produced by ADP automatically and filed to CRA and Revenue Quebec. So in all, it provides us support and assistance to pay our employees and meet all of the legislative requirements.
And the longer I do this job, the more I realize payroll is complicated. And every time I turn around, it seems to get more complicated. So having a company that's got all of these specialists on board really helps. There's the list that Angelica put up there. This is why we use it. Question on the chat there. We're required to use it for ministers. Is it a good idea to use it for other people too?
As well, absolutely.
For a lot of the same reasons, because it just makes our life, like almost none of our treasurers are professional payroll specialists. I mean, I would love to have you in my congregation, Angelica, but you're not. Other questions about why we use it? Let's just see if there's, as people kind of read through your checklist, see if there are any questions that come up on the chat before we move on to the next slide. Do we have to use ADP, says Maggie, or can we use some other payroll provider?
No, you need to use ADP, as ADP is in charge of rolling up all of the premiums for the benefits and pension contributions, so you must use ADP.
So they've got connections into your office and the benefits and the pension plan, as well as into the government requirements.
Correct.
That makes a lot of sense. And what about people who don't receive any of those benefits because they're very, very part-time?
They can still be added to the payroll system.
Mm-hmm. So Clyde is reminding us how expensive treasurer's time is. I mean, we sometimes complain about the fee for getting ADP to process the payroll, but think about how much time would go into it if you were doing it yourself. The fee is pretty small. A concern here, says Maggie, that she doesn't want to run the payroll every 2 weeks.
We have two types of payrolls currently, so which takes me to the next question is, we have a run as is payroll, which is a payroll that runs automatically, unless of course there's any changes, but that needs to be set up. And then we have our regular payrolls where, there's often quite changes that need to be done, and you need to pay close attention to it. The run as is automatically is processed. It is not processed by someone at ADP, it is automatic. However, any changes that need to be done, you must go into the system and approve the changes and check your reports before on the due date, on the pay date, in order for it to be processed. some of the concerns that has come across our desk is that on a run as is, they make changes, but they don't run through the whole cycle of the payroll. So to keep that in,
So a run as is would be good for a salaried employee that it gets paid the same amount every pay period.
exactly.
And the other kind that you would want to trigger every time would be for a hourly employee who might get paid a different amount every time.
Exactly.
Any opinions about whether you want to run this every 2 weeks or once a month? I mean, if different places do it different ways. I mean, my wife is paid twice a month and I get paid once a month. Go figure.
So there's the two options. However, we encourage pastoral charges to either do it on the 15th of the month, but not on the 1st of the month and not on the 31st of the month. So picking dates that are not close to the onset and to the end. But there is two options.
I think my pastoral charge opted for once a month because the fees were half the price of doing it every 2 weeks. I think it was just that simple.
Preferably, as you say, once a month would be best. The fees are less, and you're not having to pay twice for processing your payroll.
Because you pay a fee for each pay period, right?
That's right, and per employee.
Yeah. So it's basically if you're on a 2 week schedule, you're paying the fee every 2 weeks. If you're on a 1 month schedule, you're paying the fee once a month.
That's right.
Well, there's a way to save a little bit of money.
Sure is. So some of the tasks that you need to be mindful always is to check your payroll schedule that is provided by ADP as you enter new hires, rehires, or hours for hourly employees, and any applicable changes related to the employees. Ensure that you calculate the payroll to validate the payroll reports. Ensure that the changes are done correctly. You must approve the payroll, just making the changes will not process. For run as is payroll, you must ensure that you check the payroll reports. And quite often I hear that, well, if it's run as is, why do I need to check? I think it's a good practice that every 3 months, quarterly, just check in to see if the information is correct. We've had cases where, we've caught it at the end of the year, and then we've had to do the impact of that is calculations between ADP, ourselves, and the benefit center. So it is important that you check your payroll consistently, even if you have a run as is. It's a good practice.
I need to say I had that kind of screw up in my payroll about 6 years ago, and it was a nightmare. We made double deductions for some things for 9 months before anybody caught it, and it was several months before it all got untangled. So yeah, the idea of double checking it, even the run it is as is ones, double checking it quarterly makes a whole lot of sense. I had asked you for a checklist, and this will be on the slides when you pick them up at Church X, folks. But there's the list that Angelica just ran through. Here are the things that you probably ought to do each pay period, or as she says, for if you've got a sort of automated one, the run as is, at least do it quarterly. Any surprises in that checklist? Put your notes and put your questions in the chat before we go on. As we were building this conversation, Angelica and I, we were saying it would be helpful just to have a checklist so that people could sit down and tick them off. Here's my first of the month tasks. Here's my 15th of the month, or whatever it is. So Reinhardt says, run as is does not require monthly approval. That's correct. Yeah, it just goes. It's good to check, but it'll do whatever it did last month unless you change it.
Specifically at the beginning in January, where there's a cost of living, it doesn't automatically add the cost of living. You must go in, even as a run is, you must go in and update the information in order for it to continue for the year. So quite often we've gotten, well, it's run as is, doesn't it? Isn't it automatic? No, ADP does not go in and change the cost of living. You must go in and enter all of that information.
Yeah, and sometimes my treasurer hasn't gotten their act together in January, so I've had a bump in my February or March paycheck by the time it finally all got processed. Is it possible to do a monthly payroll for one employee and a bi-monthly payroll for another employee, or do they all have to be on the same schedule?
Same schedule, it's preferably. Kind of challenging to have one person pay monthly and one payroll and one.
Sounds like a opportunity for complications and errors, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, I would highly recommend.
Make it as simple as possible. It's complicated enough.
Absolutely.
What about things like WSIB for maybe a couple of employees? Can ADP handle that too?
Yes, they can.
Tell us about, somebody's asking about the 14 hours a week deadline or threshold. What's that about?
So that's covered in my next slide, but that's okay.
Then don't worry about it.
I could go into it. Okay.
No, let's go on to the next slide then. So basically this is a checklist that you're recommending every payroll administrator in a community of faith run through once a month if they have a non-run as is, or at least quarterly if it's all automated, just to make sure that
incorrect information has an incredible impact, and to go back to fix it, it poses a lot of challenges because there's 3 players involved. That's us, ADP, and the benefits center. So it's incredibly important to enter that information accurately.
I keep turning off the screen share because I want people to be able to see your face. One of my goals in all these webinars is that people know that we aren't faceless bureaucrats, and when our faces are tiny on the screen, nobody knows what we look like. So you had a couple of other functions that the payroll system will provide for us.
Yeah, and so the system offers a self-service portal online where all of your employees can actually access their pay statements and their tax forms. In addition to that, the system will hold all of your payroll records, including reports, employee data, information, et cetera, et cetera.
Perfect. So that actually answers one of the questions that came up in the chat, and I was just waiting for you to say that. So those are the monthly tasks or the bi-weekly tasks, depending on how your payrolls run. But then there's a bunch of other things you were kind of alluding to that probably are going to come up once a year. What are those? And what would you put on that checklist?
So again, review your payroll calendar for payroll input dates because there may be pay date conflicts due to statutory holidays. And that's huge in the month of December. So it's important for you to review. And if you're needing to make that adjustment of a different date to ensure that you're in alignment with ADP, and you can give ADP a call, but it's important that you review your payroll calendar. You must process cost of living adjustments, salary changes, and any minimum wage requirements. These are not done by ADP, they're not done by us. You must do that on a yearly basis. Again, review your payroll prior to your final payroll. Make sure any manual checks and recall payments are adjusted in your payroll. Check for CPP, EI discrepancies. Review the tax forms prior to the final tax form production. And of course, for Quebec employers, complete and file your RL1 summary.
So again, that feels to me, I'm a neophyte at this. That just feels like a whole long list of gobbledygook, but I imagine anyone who's actually running a payroll understands what you just said. There's the checklist. Any surprises on that as you look through it, folks?
And good practice to continue to check your payrolls. I understand that, we have volunteers with limited time, but the periodic checking of information and accuracy of information at the end of the year, you're not going to have that many headaches. It will be an easy process.
I imagine, like anything else too, once you've done it a few times, it gets easier. If you only ever go into the site once a year to make a change, you never find your way around it. But if you're double checking it every quarter, you'll probably be able to make the changes a whole lot easier when you get there.
Mhm.
Some people are having trouble connecting with ADP because the password's expired or emails are going to the wrong place. What do you recommend when there's some kind of communication glitch like that?
Well, absolutely. The payroll team, our payroll team is always there to assist you with that. There is an email address for ADP, and they have been a bit more effective than the phone calls that used to be in place before. But if you are having those challenges, don't hesitate to call the UCC payroll team.
I need to say there have been several comments in the meeting chat about what a great job your team is doing. I didn't plant those ahead of time. It sounds like people really have been reaching out to you and finding that really, really helpful. So thank you for that.
So the next slide is some of the challenges that we are seeing.
I love this question. So when Angelica and I were sitting down to plan out this thing, I said to her, what kinds of questions does your team get? So here's her checklist of how she's training her team to respond to your queries. Let's see if any of these catch you.
Yeah, so there's quite a few challenges that we have faced that have an incredible impact. So missing or incomplete benefit data information causes the membership cancellation. So that's very key and crucial. It takes a lot of time for us to correct the information. And like I said, it's between 3 parties that are involved. So crucial that the benefit data is inputted correctly.
Well, and that can hit people in their prescription costs and that kind of thing, right? I mean, they take their prescriptions to the pharmacy and all of a sudden they get hit with the full cost because the benefits aren't, oh my goodness. So yeah, that's on us to make sure it's right.
Yeah, so the hours of work entered incorrectly. So, and this goes to the question asked earlier, 14 hours a week is the minimum required for eligibility for benefits. So if you have someone who is working 10 hours, they're not eligible for benefits, but 14 and plus, they're eligible for benefits. And that's what the 14-hour question is about.
Great. Thank you. They can still be paid by ADP even if they're only working 10 hours a week.
Absolutely.
But it's the benefit plan they can't, the medical plan and that stuff that they can't get without the 14-hour threshold.
And so one issue that we have recently been faced with is the incorrect increase for ministers or no increase during an appointment or a call, a new appointment or a new call. So in other words, there is an employment call for 2 years and the salary isn't changed and the cost of living is not adjusted.
Mm.
So we have discovered that has become a bit of an issue in the lately. And so we're having to adjust and again, make the changes retroactive because just because your appointment is for 2 years does not mean that your salary will never change for the 2 years.
So you're entitled to a salary change on the 1st of January.
That's right, and the cost of living, depending on the number, right? So that's
A couple of people asking about the benefit plan. Can an employee who's working more than 14 hours a week, can they opt out of the benefit plan, or are they required?
mandatory. It's a mandatory and a requirement.
Okay. Even for lay people, for musicians and secretaries and yeah, okay. Is there somebody's asking about a 3-month waiting period for new employees?
Yeah, I understand that there is a 3-month waiting period. So yes, that is a policy that if you choose to implement, so there's a 3-month waiting period. UCC does not have a 3-month waiting period. On your first day, you are eligible for benefits.
So a congregation could do that,
Could
but
do that.
they're not required to do that.
They can't.
They can, but they don't have to. They can start on day one if they choose to do that.
That's right.
Okay.
Good practice. I mean, from experience in other organizations that I have worked, it's always been a 3-month waiting period. That's not the case any longer. It has changed over the years where, eligibility for benefits is on the first thing.
Well, and speaking as a minister who might well move from one church to another, I wouldn't want to move from one church to another and be without benefits for 3 months just because I changed churches.
Mhm.
I appreciate that I don't have to.
So the other challenges that we hear is about the lack of a systemic training for new payroll administrators. But as you alluded, Stephen, we're going to be working very closely to develop one. So more to come on that. And also some of the questions that we get is, who can I reach out for assistance? Where can I find policies? Where are the resources specifically for new pastoral charges?
Okay.
So overall,
Questions about that? I mean, there's been a little bit of chatter in the meeting chat, but I think Evelyn is answering an awful lot of the questions as we talk. So thanks for that, Evelyn. Treasurers, yeah, absolutely, are baptized by fire. Your job is important. It's crucial.
So one last point that I need to also bring up is your address change. When a minister changes their address, they change it on Church Hub, but they fail to update the ADP system. And important. If you're changing your address, it must be done on both systems because they're not connected with each other.
Thank you. Roberto asks, when does a minister move up the salary grid? On their work anniversary or on the next January?
That I'm not very familiar with, and so I can take that question and find the appropriate answer. I don't want to misquote it.
Okay, I see Alan Hall on the line. Alan, are you able to answer that question?
Sorry, I was texting in response to one of the other questions, and I didn't hear the question.
The question is, when a minister moves to a new category level in the salary grid, does that happen on the 1st of January or on the anniversary date of their ordination or hire, or how is that handled?
I'm not certain of that, so let's take that away, and we'll bring that back to the next session.
Okay, thank you. This is why we have these sessions, folks. When Angelica and Alan between them don't know the answer, then it's worth waiting a month.
Oh, we can find out sooner than 1 month. You can just send a question to our.
I think for me, it always happened on the 1st of January, but that doesn't mean it was right. It just means that's what happened for me.
Yeah, and I think that is right. But if someone is working part-time, they may not have the requisite number of hours to move the category. So that's where I'm reluctant to give a definitive answer here tonight.
I appreciate that, Ellen. Thank you. Other questions about the things on the slide? And let me move along. Oh, this is the one we've all been waiting for. How do we get help when we screw up or when we can't figure it out?
We have quite a few helpful resources, about 5 venues actually, in which way you can get assistance. So first and foremost, obviously, the ADP client service team. They're there to assist you to stop the incorrect payment and make necessary year-to-date adjustments to reverse the overpayments. They're there to update the information on the company at a company level, changing payroll frequency if needed, updating the employer's banking information, which is key, changing the name of the employer, fix the system setup, make year-end adjustments. So this is what ADP is there to assist you with.
Perfect. So we have direct contact with them to answer those sorts of technical questions.
That's right. That's right. And then ADP also has a portal where it's called the Bridge that you can access through Team Pay. And there's an enormous amount of training videos that exist. And they walk you through. They're very, very well done. And I know that some pastoral charges have been asking for them because they were taken down at one time. But it walks you through hiring a minister, hiring a lay employee, what are some of the responsibilities of a run as this payroll, making changes, T4s, and how to get them processed. So there's videos that can assist you with this. There is the pastoral charge new hire form. That form is an Excel form that actually is a smart form that calculates everything for you, and it's a tool that you can use. And based on using that form, once you complete it all, you can transfer the information into TeamPay and start entering that information. That's also in the Bridge, and it walks you through how it can be used. And so that's a venue. And then we also have, of course, my marvelous team, the UCC payroll team. We're there to assist you, to walk you through the payroll setup and changes, to assist you, in UCC pension and benefits setup or calculations. We assist you with any other payroll-related legislation or compliance, and we troubleshoot any issues that you raised with us. But important is that to note that we do not have access to the system. We can only help you through coaching you and mentoring and troubleshooting any issues with ADP.
That's important. My first church was an Anglican United Shared Ministry, and the Anglicans I was associating with were all paid through a single payroll at the diocesan office. But the United Church ministers I was associated with were all paid by an individual payroll in their own pastoral charge.
That's right.
I think it's important for us to understand that that's the responsibility of our congregational payroll authorities, that there's you folks, your team, Angela, can help us, but it's their payroll. It's not yours.
Yeah, I think that's an important piece that is part of our historic identity from 1925, that the pastoral charge community faith is the payer of ministry personnel called or appointed. And so our pension and benefits plans are established as multi-employer plans. And so each congregation is technically the employer from that perspective. For the Anglicans, they do that collectively through the diocese because their polity is and ecclesiology, the nature of church is completely different.
Very, very different.
Every priest is the employee technically of their bishop.
Of their bishop.
Yeah, not their parish.
Yep. So that puts a significant onus on the treasurers here tonight. Angelica's team will help you do it, but you have to be the ones doing it. Thank you.
And the last couple of places where you can find assistance as well is the pastoral charge payroll service. There's a site that offers policy about how to pay staff, how to read payroll reports, and also the pastoral charge form is there, a tool to assist you. And so the UCC website also has additional resources, the budgeting tool for treasurers, the maternity parental leave top-up calculator, which is important. You're also going to be able to find the minimum salaries and reimbursements for ministry personnel and the cost of living group assignments. So on our site, on our United Church website, there's 2 places within that site that you can find that information.
So we should find the links for folks. And if we can't find them tonight, let's add them at the ChurchX page, because I think, I mean, they can go to the unitedchurch.ca site and search on those titles, but we could give them the links too, I think.
Absolutely. So those are the venues that exist at the moment. A few other resources and that would be the next slide that we have. We are developing an onboarding for new payroll administrators, so that's very exciting and it's coming soon. We hold these webinars here monthly. We also have ConX, where is a bulletin that is sent quarterly with some tips about payroll. And so that there's quite a few resources that you can access and look out for.
Okay. There have been a lot of questions in the chat, but I noticed that your members of your team have been responding as we go along. So let me give you folks one last kick at the can here. And while I do that, I'm going to put up the email addresses here that so that you can reach the support people at the United Church. That's the unitedchurch.ca one, and the ADP folks. Those are the 2 key email addresses you'll need. Any last questions for Angelica before we move on to the last piece of our agenda tonight? And I apologize for running so long. I had a lot to talk about, and I think the underused housing tax thing took a lot longer than we were anticipating it might. Is it mandatory to receive a paper copy of the T4s and reports rather than just download electronic ones?
I'm sorry, it's mandatory to what?
To receive a paper copy of T4 slips.
Yeah, well, not hard copy. You can always get it. IDP automatically produces you the T4s, and you can request it. Yeah, it's mandatory. Yes, it's mandatory to get for all your employees.
Thank you. Someone's suggesting a new employer newsletter email. It should have a direct link to the current newsletters. That's helpful, James. Thanks. We'll collect the chat comments and follow up on them.
I'm putting the pastoral charge payroll service website on the chat, but we'll definitely add it to the presentation as well, so people can easily access it.
Thank you. Thank you, Angelica.
You're very welcome.
So does TeamPay provide T4s directly to employees by PDF?
Yes, employees can access them. Yes, they can. They can download them.
Yeah, I don't think it came to me automatically. I had to go and look for it.
No, you would have to go into the self-service and access it yourself.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
So are the T4s also mailed? I think mine is. Are they routinely mailed?
Eileen can answer that question. She's more familiar with that process on the chat. It can be mailed if you request it, absolutely. But
I know the package comes to my church, but I don't know whether we pay extra for that. They come to the community of faith and Kelly mails them out. I think that's true in my church too.
it's part of the cost, the T4s, but I can confirm that.
Sure. Okay. Let me just zip through this last series of slides. Eric prepared these, so I'm not competent to answer questions on them. I had reached out to Susan Jackson to see if she might present these, and I didn't see her online tonight. Susan, if you're there, you are here. Would you like to say something about these?
The assessments were posted to Church Hub on January the 16th. So all of the treasurers for which we have a current email address and you have been invited to Church Hub can access your information. And there's also an email blast that's going to be coming out from Harry Lee, our controller, indicating that same information to treasurers who may not be online tonight.
Oh, super. Thank you. So the invoices are available. Here's
Yes.
a new mailing list if people want to send their checks. And again, these slides are already posted at ChurchX, but you can go and get that there. Don't forget to put assessment or DA, which means denominational assessment, on your check so that when it arrives, we know what it's for. So tell us about statistics, Susan. This is the most exciting part of your job, right?
No, it's talking to treasurers. That's the fun part of my job. So the statistics process is underway currently. I'm sure most of the treasurers know that. The first deadline for filing for single point pastoral charges is this coming Monday. The forms are flowing in. Thank you. And the second deadline is March 18th for those who are multi-point pastoral charges. If you are a few days behind, do not panic. I get 300 to 400 on those days and I edit all of them, which means I look at every line of what you enter to make sure that the information looks reasonable year over year and that you haven't missed a zero or added a zero somewhere. I will call if there is a problem, or I'll send you an email to let you know that I think something looks a little out of whack. Questions are always welcome. You can send them to statistics@united-church.ca. I try to respond same day. If it's 24 hours, it's just because of volume. And I take all calls.
Thank you. So what's new for this year? Two important new things.
We added 2 new components this year. The first has to do with the United Church of Canada's goal of reducing greenhouse gases by 80% by 2030. In order to do that, we need to get a baseline of where folks are at. And I do realize that some people, their bills do not give them a year-to-date running total. If you don't have it, don't panic. It's the first year. We'll look for that information next year. We're going to be sort of doing the 2-year comparison. And then this will continue going forward as we work towards trying to make this greenhouse gas goal. And there are a number of grants out, particularly Faithful Footprints, to help with building retrofits to help this happen. That was expanded this year. There is more money available. We do know that some congregations have already done that, but we would like to encourage people to look at whether it's new roofs, insulation, HVAC systems, heat pumps, whatever, to help your building. And the volunteer hours is one that I actually am getting quite a number of. And sorry, just let me go back. There was a problem on the printed forms that it asked for BTUs for the measurement of the consumption. The folks who asked for this question to be added after the forms were printed, of course, changed their mind. So electricity is kilowatt hours. Propane and oil is in liters, and gas is in meters cubed, not BTUs. So just wanted to let you know that. We also added volunteer hours. We feel that communities of faith should not be measured just by dollars and the number of people. There are a number of very small, tiny congregations out there who are doing amazing work in their communities and broader fields, and we want to acknowledge that. And as part of our 25th anniversary, we'll be doing some kickoffs starting June 2nd of this year. We want to tell that story. And we also want you to know the work that your people are doing. And several have already commented on how flabbergasted they are when they start to look at their numbers, how many volunteer hours are actually being contributed by their folks.
Oh, it's phenomenal.
So those are the two pieces that got added this year.
Thank you. And Eric said last month, and I think that's important, they're not looking for lots of decimal points. Like, do the best estimate you can without staying awake at night. We're looking for round numbers, but I mean, and Clyde was saying to me earlier today, ask each of your committees to figure out how many hours a month they're putting into it, and then multiply by 12. You'll get an estimate that at least gives you a ballpark of what's going on, and that's going to be most useful for this year.
I am telling people to do best guesstimates for this year, and since we're not that far into 2024, they could track it a little better for 2024.
Well, and keep notes of how you made that estimate. You might want to just keep doing it too, so that your numbers are consistently derived. Yeah. So there's the greening the church, the carbon measures. I'm a big fan of that greening the faithful footprints grant. We got an excellent grant at our church, and it dropped our gas consumption by 23%. We're thrilled with it. There's the volunteer hours and what it looks like on the form. This is where you can find your assessments. So log into Church Hub, look for reports, and when you get the drop-down menu, you've got the target assessment and the assessment invoices.
And if folks have already filed their 2023 statistics, the 2025 target assessment is now available.
So there you go. We calculates it immediately.
Yes.
So hours towards the life of the community of faith, does that include things that we do for outreach projects like food banks?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. We've run long tonight. Eric talks faster than the rest of us do, I think. But here's the penultimate slide where we list all of those contacts for action. Most of those folks you will recognize. I'm going to add in Susan's email and Angelica's email. Well, no, I don't need to add Angelica because you got the pastoral charge payroll sort of group address. But I do want to say thank you to each of our presenters tonight, to Clyde and to Angelica and to Rose and to Susan. It's been important information, and I'm grateful for your help. So we've had a request to move this program next month because it falls in the Wednesday of Holy Week. I don't know how many treasurers that touches. It certainly touches lots of ministers who have extra services and other things going on. My suggestion is that we should just push it on a week onto April 3rd. That'll give Eric another week to land in Canada and be prepared to come back and keep our program short next time. I hope you're comfortable with that. If anybody has really upset response to that suggestion, put it in the chat right now. And otherwise, mark your calendar that we'll meet next, not on the 27th of March, but on the 3rd of April.
Just wanted to say thank you for tonight, and also thank you for my team to always be there answering questions. They're great support.
So that does draw to a close our program for this evening. As I say, we've run long, and I apologize for that, except that the information was rich and the questions were important, and I hope we've had a chance to make you feel more comfortable about that annoying reporting requirement and the opportunities that we have to do payroll. Thank you so much, and blessings for a holy Lent and a wonderful, joyous Easter. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the 3rd of April. We will also meet on the 24th of April. Yes, we'll go back to our last Thursday, or fourth Wednesday of the month. Just wanted to push that one out of Holy Week so that some of us would have at least a couple of hours off that week. Very good. Thanks again, friends. And I will just turn off the recording.
Stephen, did you want to meet or are we okay?
I was just going to say if the